The morning fog hung thick over London as Marcus Thompson adjusted his expensive leather belt one final time before stepping out of his hotel. He was a successful businessman from Manchester, visiting the capital for what he hoped would be the deal of his lifetime. The 42-year-old had worked his way up from nothing, and today's meeting could secure his family's future forever. Marcus had always been particular about his appearance. His father, a factory worker, had taught him that respect came through presentation. The Italian leather belt he wore had cost him nearly £300, but it was worth every penny. It completed his sharp navy suit perfectly, and he believed it gave him the confidence he needed for important occasions. Walking through the busy London streets, Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His small manufacturing company back home employed 12 people, and the potential contract he was pursuing could double that number. These weren't just employees to him. They were neighbors, friends, people whose families depended on the decisions he made every day. The meeting location was near Buckingham Palace, and Marcus decided to take a longer route to calm his nerves. He had always found something soothing about the historic areas of London. The ancient stones and grand architecture reminded him that countless people before him had faced their own crucial moments in these very streets. As he approached the palace area, Marcus noticed the usual crowd of tourists gathering around the gates. Camera flashes sparkled in the morning light as visitors from around the world tried to capture the perfect shot of the famous guards. He smiled, remembering his own first visit to London years ago when he was just a young man with big dreams and empty pockets. The royal guards stood motionless at their posts, their red uniforms and tall black hats creating a striking image against the palace backdrop. Marcus had always admired their discipline and dedication. Standing perfectly still for hours, maintaining their composure despite tourists constantly trying to get their attention, seemed like an incredible feat of mental strength. Lost in thought about his upcoming meeting, Marcus didn't notice the loose cobblestone ahead. His polished Oxford shoe caught the edge and he stumbled forward, arms flailing as he tried to regain his balance. The sudden movement caused his belt to slip from its loops, and in a moment that seemed to happen in slow motion, the leather accessory flew through the air. Time seemed frozen as Marcus watched his precious belt arc through the morning sky. He could see exactly where it was heading, and his heart sank with the terrible realization that there was nothing he could do to stop what was about to happen. The belt struck one of the royal guards directly in the chest with a soft thud that seemed to echo louder than it should have in the suddenly quiet courtyard. The guard, a young man named James Wellington, who had been serving for just 8 months, felt the unexpected impact but maintained his rigid posture. Years of training had taught him to remain unmoved regardless of what tourists might do to try to get a reaction. He had endured people shouting, making faces, even dropping things near his feet. But this was the first time someone had actually hit him with something. Marcus stood frozen in horror, his face burning red with embarrassment as he realized what had just happened. Around him, tourists began pulling out their phones, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Some laughed, thinking it was an intentional joke, while others gasped in shock at what they perceived as a serious breach of protocol. The businessman's mind raced through all the possible consequences. Would he be arrested? Would this incident somehow reach the newspapers back home? His business reputation, everything he had worked so hard to build, could be destroyed by one clumsy moment. The important meeting he was heading to suddenly seemed far less significant compared to the immediate crisis he now faced. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes watching him, waiting to see what would happen next. His expensive belt lay crumpled at the base of the guard box, looking oddly small and insignificant after causing such a commotion. The morning sun caught the brass buckle, creating a small glint that seemed to mock the seriousness of the situation. Guard James Wellington had been trained for many scenarios during his months of preparation, but nothing quite like this. Protocol dictated that he should remain absolutely still and silent, ignoring any attempts by the public to interact with him. However, his training also emphasized the importance of assessing potential security threats, and an object flying toward a royal guard certainly fell into that category. Marcus took a hesitant step forward, his hands shaking slightly as he considered his options. Should he apologize loudly and hope for the best? Should he simply walk away and pretend it never happened? The businessman in him knew that running from problems only made them worse. but his rational mind was struggling against the panic rising in his chest. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the whispers and pointing of the tourists who had witnessed the incident. Marcus could hear fragments of conversations in multiple languages, and he was certain that some people were already sharing videos of his humiliating stumble on social media. The thought made his stomach turn with anxiety. An elderly woman with a kind face approached Marcus, speaking in a gentle Scottish accent. "Are you all right, dear? That was quite a tumble you took." Her genuine concern helped ground him slightly, reminding him that not everyone was judging him harshly. Some people simply saw a man who had experienced an unfortunate accident. "I need to get my belt," Marcus whispered, more to himself than to the woman. "I can't just leave it there." The leather accessory represented more than just a fashion choice to him. It was a symbol of how far he had come in life, and abandoning it felt like giving up on everything he had worked to achieve. Meanwhile, James Wellington was having his own internal struggle. The young guard had joined the royal service because he believed in duty, honor, and serving something greater than himself. His grandfather had been a guard decades earlier, and had filled James's childhood with stories of the dignity and pride that came with the position. The belt hadn't hurt him physically, but James could sense the genuine distress of the man who had accidentally thrown it. Through his peripheral vision, he could see Marcus standing there, clearly wrestling with what to do next. Something about the situation felt different from the usual tourist antics that guards were trained to ignore. James thought about his grandfather's stories, particularly one about a time when a child had accidentally dropped a toy soldier near his post. The old man had always said that being a guard wasn't just about following rules blindly, but about understanding when human decency should guide your actions within the bounds of duty. The crowd continued to grow, and Marcus realized that standing there indefinitely would only make things worse. He took a deep breath and stepped closer to the guard, careful to move slowly and keep his hands visible. The last thing he wanted was to be perceived as any sort of threat to royal security. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "I'm terribly sorry about what happened. It was completely accidental. May I please retrieve my belt?" His tone was respectful and humble, reflecting genuine remorse rather than entitled demand. James Wellington heard every word clearly, though he maintained his stoic expression. The sincerity in the man's voice was unmistakable, and something about the situation reminded him why he had wanted to become a guard in the first place. It wasn't about being a statue or a tourist attraction. It was about representing the best of British values and character. The moment stretched on, and Marcus began to worry that his polite request would be met with continued silence. He had heard stories about the guards' legendary ability to ignore even the most persistent attempts to get their attention. Perhaps he would have to accept that his belt was lost forever, along with a small piece of his dignity. What happened next would be talked about for years to come. James Wellington, without moving his head or changing his rigid posture, spoke in a clear, measured voice that cut through the morning air. "Sir, accidents happen to the best of us. Your belt is there whenever you're ready to collect it." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the most experienced London tour guides in the group had never heard a royal guard speak to a member of the public during duty. Cameras and phones that had been recording expectantly suddenly became much more focused. Capturing what everyone sensed was an extraordinary moment. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by profound gratitude. The guard's response was so unexpected and generous that it took him a moment to process what had just happened. Here was a man who could have easily ignored him, reported him, or caused him serious trouble, instead choosing kindness and understanding. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." He moved carefully toward his belt, very aware that dozens of people were watching his every move. As he bent to pick up the leather accessory, he noticed that it was completely undamaged despite its unexpected flight through the morning air. James Wellington's words had been chosen carefully. His training allowed for necessary communication when public safety or courtesy required it, and he had decided that this situation qualified. The man's obvious distress and genuine politeness deserved a human response, even within the constraints of his ceremonial duties. As Marcus straightened up, belt in hand, he looked directly at the guard for the first time. Though James maintained his formal posture and forward gaze, There was something in his bearing that conveyed dignity and compassion. Marcus realized he was witnessing someone who understood that true strength sometimes meant knowing when to bend the rules in service of basic human decency. The elderly Scottish woman who had spoken to Marcus earlier began clapping slowly, and others in the crowd joined in. It wasn't mockery or sarcasm. It was genuine appreciation for both men, the guard for his unexpected kindness, and Marcus for his respectful handling of an embarrassing situation. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mummy, why are people clapping for the man who dropped his belt?" Her mother, clearly moved by what she had witnessed, knelt down and explained, "Sometimes, darling, we clap when people show us how to be kind to each other." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. What had started as his worst nightmare was becoming something entirely different. The guard's simple act of speaking to him had transformed a moment of humiliation into something that felt almost magical. James Wellington could feel the positive energy from the crowd, and it reinforced his belief that he had made the right decision. His grandfather would have approved, he was certain of that. The old stories had always emphasized that being a guard meant representing the best of British character, and sometimes that meant showing compassion rather than rigid adherence to protocol. An American tourist with a thick New York accent called out, "That was beautiful, man. You guys just showed us what class really looks like." His comment sparked a small cheer from the crowd, and Marcus found himself smiling despite his earlier panic. The businessman realized that his belt, which had seemed so important just minutes ago, was now secondary to the lesson he was learning. He had been so focused on his appearance and his upcoming business meeting that he had forgotten about the simple power of human connection and kindness. Looking around at the faces in the crowd, Marcus saw something wonderful. People from different countries, different backgrounds, different ages, all united in appreciation for a moment of genuine human goodness. The guard's response had created something special that went far beyond the simple retrieval of a dropped accessory. James Wellington remained at his post, but internally he felt a satisfaction that was different from anything his military training had prepared him for. He had found a way to maintain his duties while still responding to someone's genuine need with kindness and respect. Word of the incident spread faster than Marcus could have imagined. By the time he reached his business meeting an hour later, his phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Someone in the crowd had captured the entire exchange on video, and it was already being shared across social media platforms, with captions like "Faith in Humanity Restored" and "This is why the Royal Guards are legendary." The business meeting itself took an unexpected turn when Marcus's potential partner, a stern-faced executive named Victoria Hamilton, greeted him with a knowing smile. "You wouldn't happen to be the gentleman from the palace incident this morning, would you?" she asked, showing him her phone screen displaying the viral video. Marcus felt his cheeks redden again, but this time it wasn't entirely from embarrassment. "I'm afraid that's me," he admitted, unsure whether this revelation would help or hurt his business prospects. "Not exactly the professional image I was hoping to project today." Victoria's expression softened in a way that surprised him. "On the contrary, Mr. Thompson, what I saw in that video tells me more about your character than any business presentation ever could. The way you handled that situation with such grace and respect speaks volumes about the kind of person you are." The meeting that followed was unlike any business negotiation Marcus had ever experienced. Instead of the usual cold discussions about profit margins and delivery schedules, they found themselves talking about values, integrity, and the importance of treating people well. The viral video had somehow opened a door to a more meaningful conversation about partnership. Meanwhile, back at the palace, James Wellington was experiencing his own unexpected consequences. His commanding officer, Captain Sarah Mitchell, had called him for a private conversation during his break. Marcus's heart had been pounding as he approached her office, worried that he was about to face disciplinary action for breaking protocol. "Wellington," Captain Mitchell began, her tone unreadable, "I've been getting calls about you all morning." She paused, studying his face carefully. "It seems you've become something of an internet sensation." James stood at attention, prepared for the worst. "Yes, ma'am. I understand I may have acted outside normal protocol. I take full responsibility for my actions." Captain Mitchell's stern expression gradually gave way to something that looked almost like pride. "Actually, Wellington, you've done something remarkable. The palace has received more positive messages today than we typically see in a month. People are praising not just your kindness, but the entire Royal Guard service." She showed him her computer screen, which displayed dozens of social media posts and news articles about the morning's events. Headlines read, "Royal Guard shows true British spirit," and "Kindness at the palace gates touches hearts worldwide." "Sir Charles himself has seen the video," Captain Mitchell continued, referring to a senior palace official. "He specifically asked me to commend you for representing the service with such dignity and compassion." James felt a surge of relief mixed with pride. His grandfather's lessons about duty and kindness had guided him well, and now those values were being recognized at the highest levels. The story was picked up by major news outlets across the globe. The BBC ran a segment about modern chivalry, using the belt incident as an example of how small acts of kindness could have far-reaching positive effects. American morning shows discussed the video as a feel-good story that had brought joy to millions of viewers. Back in Manchester, Marcus's employees gathered around the office television to watch their boss being interviewed via video call on a popular talk show. They cheered as he credited his success in securing the London contract, partially to the lessons he learned from the Royal Guard about treating people with respect and dignity. The interviewer asked Marcus what message he would give to viewers about the experience. "Sometimes our worst moments can become our best teachers," he reflected. "I was so worried about making the right impression that I forgot the most important impression we can make is simply being kind to one another." Social media users began sharing their own stories of unexpected kindness, using hashtags inspired by the video. The simple interaction between a businessman and a guard had sparked a movement of people celebrating moments when strangers showed compassion to each other. A children's book author reached out to Marcus, asking permission to write a story based on the incident. The proposed book would teach young readers about accidents, forgiveness, and how being kind to others often comes back to us in wonderful ways. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus received an invitation that left him speechless. The Palace Communications Office had extended a formal invitation for him to return to Buckingham Palace for a special ceremony recognizing both him and James Wellington for their roles in promoting positive international relations and demonstrating exemplary public behavior. The invitation explained that their brief interaction had generated more positive publicity for British values and the royal institution than any formal campaign in recent years. The video had been viewed over 10 million times globally, with people from every continent sharing messages about how the simple exchange had brightened their day or restored their faith in human kindness. Marcus called his wife, Sarah, immediately after reading the invitation. "They want to what?" she exclaimed, barely able to believe what she was hearing. Their teenage daughter Emma grabbed the phone to hear the news herself, and soon the entire family was planning the most extraordinary trip of their lives. The ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and Marcus found himself once again walking through the same streets where everything had begun. This time, however, he moved with confidence rather than nervous energy. The expensive belt was secure around his waist, but he had learned that his worth wasn't measured by his accessories or possessions. James Wellington was equally amazed by the turn of events. In just 3 weeks, he had gone from being a relatively unknown guard to representing the best qualities of British military service on an international stage. Letters of appreciation had arrived from around the world, including touching messages from children who wanted to thank him for being kind to the belt man. The ceremony took place in one of the palace's elegant reception rooms, with a small group of attendees including family members, senior palace officials, and representatives from various charitable organizations that had benefited from the increased Attention to Kindness initiatives. A senior palace representative spoke about how the viral video had become a powerful example of how individual actions, no matter how small, could create ripples of positive change across the world. Schools were using the video to teach lessons about empathy and forgiveness, while businesses were citing it as an example of customer service excellence. During his speech, Marcus shared how the experience had changed his approach to leadership in his own company. He had implemented a kindness-first policy, encouraging employees to prioritize treating customers and each other with the same respect and understanding that James had shown him. That morning, I was worried about making the right impression for all the wrong reasons, Marcus explained to the assembled group. I thought success meant looking perfect and never making mistakes. Guard Wellington taught me that real success means how we respond when things don't go according to plan. James. Wellington spoke about his grandfather's influence and how the older man's stories about service and duty had prepared him for that moment. He announced that he was establishing a scholarship fund for young people interested in military service, funded by speaking fees from the various interviews and appearances that had resulted from the video's popularity. The most touching moment came when the same 8-year-old girl from the original crowd appeared with her family. They had specifically requested to attend the ceremony, and she presented both men with drawings she had made of the special day. Her picture showed Marcus and James as cartoon characters, with hearts floating above their heads and a rainbow in the background. Following the formal ceremony, Marcus and James had their first real conversation. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both came from working-class families. Both valued hard work and integrity. And both had been surprised by how their brief interaction had touched so many people around the world. James's commanding officer later revealed that tourism to Buckingham Palace had increased significantly since the video went viral, with visitors specifically hoping to see the Kind Guard in action. The palace had received requests from tour companies, wanting to include the story as part of their standard presentations about British culture and values. A documentary filmmaker approached both men about creating a short film exploring how small acts of kindness could have global impact. The project would follow up with some of the people who had been inspired by their story to perform their own acts of compassion. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus realized that his original business meeting, which had seemed so crucial just weeks earlier, had turned out to be far less important than this unexpected lesson in human connection. The contract he secured that day was valuable, but the relationships and perspective he gained were priceless. 1 year later, Marcus Thompson and James Wellington remained unlikely friends whose bond had been forged in those few extraordinary minutes outside Buckingham Palace. Their story had become part of popular culture, referenced in speeches about kindness, featured in university courses about social media and human connection, and even inspiring a popular song by a British folk musician. Marcus's business had thrived beyond his wildest expectations, not just because of the initial contract he secured that day, but because his company's reputation for treating people well had attracted customers and partners from around the world. The belt incident, as his employees affectionately called it, had become central to the company's identity and values. He had written a book about the experience titled, When Life Throws You a Curveball. Lessons in Dignity from an Unexpected Teacher. All proceeds went to a charity supporting military veterans transitioning to civilian life, a cause suggested by James Wellington. James had been promoted twice and was now training new guards, always emphasizing that their role went beyond ceremony to representing the best of human character. His story had become part of the official training program, demonstrating how guards could maintain their duties while still showing appropriate compassion when circumstances warranted it. The original video continued to resurface periodically on social media, often during difficult news cycles when people needed reminding that kindness and decency still existed in the world. It had been translated into dozens of languages and shared by everyone from world leaders to elementary school teachers. A research study conducted by a university psychology department found that people who watched the video reported feeling more optimistic about human nature and were more likely to perform acts of kindness themselves in the following week. The simple interaction had created measurable positive effects on thousands of strangers. Marcus and James met regularly for lunch, comparing notes on how their unexpected fame had affected their lives. James often joked that he had become the most recognized royal guard in history, while Marcus marveled at how a moment of clumsiness had led to opportunities he never could have imagined. The belt itself had become something of a celebrity in its own right. Marcus had been offered thousands of pounds for it by collectors and museums, but he continued to wear it regularly. It served as a daily reminder that our worst moments can become our greatest teachers, and that human connection matters more than material possessions. During their anniversary lunch, exactly 1 year after the incident, James presented Marcus with a surprise gift. It was a photograph, professionally taken and framed, showing the exact moment when the belt was flying through the air toward James. A photographer in the crowd had captured it perfectly, and the image had become iconic. "I wanted you to have this," James explained, "because it captures the split second before everything changed for both of us. Before we knew that kindness could go viral. Before we learned that strangers could become friends. Before we discovered that sometimes the most important moments in our lives happen completely by accident." Marcus was deeply moved by the gesture and the friendship it represented. Two men from different backgrounds and professions had found common ground in shared values and mutual respect. Their story had proven that human connection could transcend social boundaries and create lasting positive change. As they sat in the restaurant, both men reflected on how much their lives had changed. Marcus's daughter Emma was now studying public relations in university, inspired by how her father's story had demonstrated the power of authentic human interaction in an age of artificial communication. James's younger brother had joined the military, motivated partly by seeing how his brother's commitment to service and kindness had earned respect and admiration from around the world. The Wellington family had a new story to add to their tradition of military service. The restaurant where they met had become a regular stop for tourists following the Belt Trail, an informal tour route that included the original incident location, the hotel where Marcus stayed, and various other spots connected to their story. The owners had created a special menu item called the Gentleman's Belt, with proceeds supporting local charities. As their lunch concluded, both men agreed that while the fame and recognition had been wonderful, the real treasure was the lesson they had learned about the power of treating others with dignity and respect. Their story would continue to inspire others long after the social media buzz had faded, because it reminded people of something timeless and essential about human nature. The belt that had accidentally brought them together remained a symbol not of embarrassment or mishap, but of the unexpected ways that kindness can change the world, one person at a time.